Gongshu Canal Sports Park in China was built as one of the key components of the Asia Games, which was branded Hangzhou 2022. And it was held last year with 1 year delay due to COVID. And so this huge project was a result of a competition. There were five invited international firms in 2018, and Archi-Tectonics was selected as the winner. Who were the other four firms? What was your original vision like? And was it realized exactly the way you envisioned it?
They were all essentially experts in stadiums, and we were exactly not. But there was an Australian, there was a British, a Danish, a German, and an American, and we were the Americans, although we're mostly Europeans. So those five companies were invited, and we realized that we did not have that experience. So actually, we didn't enter as only Archi-Tectonics. We entered as three equal partners: Archi-Tectonics, Melk Landscape Architecture, and Thornton Tomasetti Structures and Environmental Engineering. That is maybe why we won, because we were the only ones that really stressed that from the beginning, that we wanted not only the park to be a sponge city, but we wanted the park to be for the neighborhood of Hangzhou. We wanted the buildings to be usable after the games. And so we made a very integrated design that integrated buildings, structures, environmental studies, and park and landscape layout all together in one comprehensive concept.
And what would you say compared to your competition scheme and how it was realized? Was it realized very closely to how you imagined?
Yeah, well, it was actually one of those really rare moments in China where so much came together. So one was that they were under enormous time pressure. They had had a local competition before the international competition. They didn't like any of the local proposals. So they did not choose anyone. They then did an international competition, but that meant they were kind of behind. So if you imagine, we were chosen May 2018, and the games were supposed to play September, October 2022. And that's like 200,000 square meters of buildings and like 47 hectares of nature, really. I think because of the pressure of the time, the fact that we had COVID, we were always hired for SD, DD, and half of construction, which is a lot, and it's not usual in China. And because we were quite strong-willed and pretty precise, the government also then asked us to do facade development for all the buildings, which meant like all the details, essentially. So we had a local office working next to us, but we were driving all the standard details, all the ways this was built, and we were on site and inside meetings throughout. And the contractor did such an amazing job, and then was so proud of it that he actually invited us last August to come and see the project, arranged that we could get in with the photographers, and then proceeded to like tour us through Hangzhou because we had some local references. And he showed us, opened archaeological digs with the main archaeological guy to see the space where the artifact I was referring to for the hybrid stadium, where they were found, what they meant. It was amazing. And I asked him, like, why do you invite us? And he's like, I have never seen architecture like this, and I love it.
What do you mean an artifact was found? On the side there was an artifact found?
No, when I had been, of course, in Hangzhou many times, and in China many times. And in one of my visits, I had seen in a museum a really interesting jade artifact that is kind of this size. It's the intersection of a square and a cylinder, and it has a mysterious reading. So they find it in very, very ancient graves. And sometimes a lot of them, sometimes one. It depends on how important the person was. And they have sort of a reading of it, but they don't actually really know what it is. And because I was trying to create hybrid buildings, I felt I had to come up with a new topology, because you can say hybrid, but what does that mean? So I felt we had to design a new taxonomy or typology for this hybrid. And thinking about it, I was remembering this artifact I had seen before. So I went back to my old photos, then did some research what this thing actually was, and started to think that maybe a hybrid building had to be an intersection of two things and had to have a more complex reading, so that the interpretation from one program to the other would not necessarily be like in the 70s, a neutral building, like we used to, like Chumi made this beautiful, factory hall of a building. That was kind of 70s, 80s. But I felt in our time where we have computers, we can be highly specific. I felt like we should really make a typology that is open to new use without being neutral, really having character, identity of place and history, and being so grounded that it is really only about the future. So going from the far past to like the far future. And so, I'm always quite ambitious. And they love that. They're first of all not stuck to their past, but they loved the fact that it had a local reference, and then that the building got this strange character that, just started to talk about, what is it? It doesn't look like a standard stadium. It also doesn't look like a standard concert hall, but it is both.
And so the key elements of this project are two stadia, a visitor center, a fitness center, a commercial mall, and a couple of parking garages. If you could touch a bit on these buildings and how they might make up the whole and how they relate to each other.
Yeah. So the stipulation of the government was to keep this park 85% park while giving that program. So kind of interesting. And of course, they translated that to you put everything on the ground. We felt like, that's kind of sad. So we started looking into that, and we developed certain typologies. So the two stadiums, we made hybrids. The underground shopping mall, we decided to make this connective artery and kind of made a hybrid of shopping with a valley. So it became a green park valley that had shops in it, the little round pavilions and the edges, and deep under it is also all kinds of cinemas and like connecting to the parking garages. So that was the three main things that you actually, if you fly over it, you see three things. You see the two hybrid stadiums and you see the valley. So these are the three big hybrids and maybe the major programs. And then the other ones we developed as earth buildings that kind of gently, that are definitely recessed, but also gently slope out of the ground so that they do have some sort of facades. There's holes punched in. So there's, for example, the exhibition center has a sculpture courtyard that's open to the air. The fitness center has a sliver on three sides with glass. And then also, because you make earth buildings or a hybrid valley, the kind of landscape and a building at the same time. So you develop it as a landscape building, but then the building still has egress rules. And so you get these long slivers of deep kind of canyons that are the egress routes to get into the building. So it's quite beautiful, actually. It's a very strange synthetic landscape. But all the buildings have 1.5 meters of earth on it, so a full-grown tree can grow on it. But then also skylights to give natural light and air to the buildings because we want it to be sustainable.
You called your design strategy Sponge City Landscape. If you could elaborate on that, and how will this complex affect the city around it as well?
This is something we need to do for all future cities. It's not a specific strategy. It is a strategy to deal with stormwater retention and filtering and cleaning of the water and retaining the water in the soil so we don't dry out. what happens with cities, because we harden all the surfaces, is that when it rains, the water can't go anywhere. We get massive floods. We get massive pollution because the dirt just gets swept away, or all kinds of things that really shouldn't be in a river get swept away. So it's a catastrophe. So what cities really should do yesterday, it's not a future plan, this is something we are way behind with, is to create these areas that can absorb the water, hold the water, filter the water. And then when it's dry, these areas will actually be able to be still green and still have plants. And we replanted the local vegetation to also attract local insects and local birds. So you recreate the local biome, which is super important because we humans are extremely arrogant. We think we can just build things from wood, chop down old forest, old growth forests, and then replant 200 birch trees, which is not the same as a old growth forest that has many different species, has many different insects and birds. And if we chop that down and make toilet paper or whatever we want, buildings out of it, we destroy a biome, and we don't think about that. We think a tree is a tree is a tree. It's not true. A tree has a whole microclimate around it, every tree. And it needs the other trees to be different in order to have that kind of full biome working.
And if you could touch a little bit more on some of the most interesting features of these buildings.
Yeah, so I think, there's a bunch of really strange things happening when you do stadiums. One is the budget's pretty low. The time is very short. And if you want to make them hybrids, you essentially make the time longer. You make the duration for the building potentially longer. You make its use more complex. So we took on that responsibility because we realized we were asking something that wasn't exactly, or we were proposing something that wasn't exactly a normal kind of proposal. So together with Thornton Tomasetti, we looked into the smartest, cheapest way to and most beautiful way, because I like to think that everything can be beautiful, way to span these huge spans. So for the table tennis stadium / concert hall, we came up with a superdome or suspendome. That means that it's very deep. It's a very light frame, but it's very deep in the center, where we had a central skylight to give natural daylighting to the ceiling. And then it becomes thinner, and basically it's set on the inner bowl, the roof, and then spanned out over the lobby and carried. So the facade was carried by the roof. So that meant we were column, like a curtain. Yeah, we were column free. And then the curtain we designed as a steel diagrid that is, because it's double bulging, right? It's going in two directions, this way and this way. We designed that as a steel diagrid with shards of glass on it that were huge, 5 meters by 7 meters. And together with our facade engineer or consultant, Bill Logan, here from New York, that has done all the big buildings in Hong Kong and Mexico City and the US. He designed little eyelets for these shards. So we actually could use plain glass and then have little aluminum eyelets kind of negotiating back to the double curve. So we could build it fast, cheap, and gorgeous. I mean, it's gorgeous. These shards are so beautiful.
You design your projects directly in a computer, and
since 1990.
Since yes, one of the first ones, and so you think of architecture in a way like solids, right? You mentioned it in one of the interviews. And if you could touch on your design process as far as the use of computers as a design tool.
Yeah, I think traditionally we think about buildings like still in the Corbusian way, where we think of it as slabs and columns. And Le Corbusier made that a more advanced model, which delivered free floating facades that have no longer structural capacity, hence have more freedom. I think the step we're in now is to think more of building as a set of components that can be prefabricated, custom shaped. Digital craft is really interesting. You know, we have a much more developed capacity to laser cut surfaces, to get translucency out of stone that is thin laminated on glass, which is our vestry building that glows by night on the outside and by day on the inside. The idea that this is a time where everything is standardized like we did in the 70s and 80s is kind of not completely true anymore. We can, if we want to use it, but we can also customize things for the same price, right? We can make custom shapes, custom forms, robotically CNC it or mill it or produce it and deliver something that is high quality, has a much higher level of precision, doesn't burden our construction site in cities, and put something on a site that is very quick, very beautiful, and has variation. So the idea, that is what I discovered in the 90s when I worked in the computer, where many people were more dealing with formal aspects. I like that too, but I thought really for me, the biggest discovery was that you could put intelligence in buildings. Intelligence in shapes, intelligence in materials. You could develop hybrid materials that are stronger, better, and don't deplete natural resources. You could think of buildings as bodies that breathe and sweat, and how do you work with that and manufacture them in a fast and precise and beautiful ways.
When you talk about your architecture, you use such words as and phrases as research, innovation, daring, performative, robotics, fearless, creases and folds, very three-dimensional, hybrids, precise fit, deep structure, embrace complexity, advanced geometry, synthetic nature, which you mentioned a few times this time, simple gestures, topological deformations, the idea of temporality, an intelligent game, collapsing the artistic with the scientific, thinking big, and living on the edge of existence. How else would you describe your work, and what kind of architecture do you try to achieve?
That's a lot of words, isn't it? Yeah, a lot of these words come back to maybe a simple aim I have is where I try, first of all, I see a building, because I'm thinking in components, I see a building as three-dimensional. The bottom is as important as the sides and the top. So theoretically, the roof could be the same as a facade, or especially in the Asian games, right? A roof is actually, in a weird way, what is that? It's like a park. So then the facades turn into something else. Maybe what we as humans need, like how a building could be more organic so that we have a closer relationship with that building. Whether it's a residential building, like the translucent stone or the folded glass that challenge you challenge you to think about the city or the environment differently, or in the Asian games where we try and really merge with nature and create a synthetic nature that incorporate us, but then we still leave nature as natural as we can to kind of recreate that kind of super nature feeling while you really inhabit it, right? You're inhabiting in a big way. So yeah, and I think that contradiction to me is actually what I usually look for. I look for something that is merging things in more complex ways to kind of give another kind of experience as a human, and to liberate us from these straight boxes we are stuffed into that really look like prison cells. So when I design something, I try and add humanness to the building. What I said, buildings are like organic bodies if you design them well.